2017, PJ became the first ever judge to judge a national show on all 6 continents. So thank you for being here, PJ. Thank you for taking the time. He is a very interesting guy. You'll enjoy him. Thank you.
Thank you for that introduction, Martinique. Could I have my phone back? Thank you very much. I do need that. And then can I get a timekeeper to tell me when to stop? Because I don't want to interfere in the auction. Awesome. Guys, just by matter of introduction, who of you speak English and are comfortable with me speaking English? Okay. Perfect. Okay, so I'll make sure that I keep a pace that the translator can keep up with me so that I don't run ahead of them. The topic's going to be quite random and broad. I'm going to speak about international challenges and opportunities within the livestock industry, and I'm also going to cover selecting animals for profitability, for functional efficiency and profitability. At any time, if any of you have a question, please ask it, because I want to speak about stuff that's actually relevant to you, and I don't just want to get trapped in a slide deck. A lot of this, how many of you were watching the show yesterday? Were any of you at the show yesterday when we were discussing the cattle? Okay, so there are quite a few of you. A lot of this is going to be repetitive, so I apologize for using similar analogies and points as I did yesterday. I'm just going to say next slide. If you guys can keep moving it on to the next slide, because it looks like my pointer might not... So it's working fine. Okay. So I work within a company called Eurus. We've got a booth here at the event. I'm mainly with Transover Genetics. We make about 600,000 embryos a year, do gene editing and cloning, and our sister companies are in semen and colostrum, in data capture, and in several other cattle industry relevant disciplines. My consulting company is PJ Butler Global Livestock Solutions. And this is, like Martinique said, any consulting or speaking, judging I do around the world is under that vein. A lot of what I'm going to say today comes from mentors or people who've really influenced me through their thoughts over the years. This is the list of what that comes from. So many of these ideas aren't originally mine. Those are probably the good ones. If there are any ideas that are originally mine, those are probably the ones that make you raise your eyebrows. So I just want to give credit to these influences and these mentors through the years. I've, like Martinique said in that introduction, I've been very fortunate to see this industry across the world in various environments and climates, different cattle cultures, different governmental systems of running countries, and it's really been an education in the way it's opened my eyes as to how the cattle industry can operate and what works and what doesn't work in these different environments. And also the fact that there isn't a textbook that covers the industry that works in all these different environments. But there are certain principles, whether you're doing beef cattle or dairy cattle or recreational cattle, or you're using cattle as beasts of burden, that apply across the board. So I'm going to try and zone into those basic principles. This was the first ever job I got when I was consulting internationally. It's in the Seychelles, and the Minister of Foreign Affairs at that time was a man called Mr. Patrick Pillay, and he hired me to come and consult on his herd in the Seychelles, which was the largest herd of cattle in the Seychelles. I had 7 days to consult with him. And when we got there, all his cattle, all 22 of them, were out looking at the Indian Ocean on beautiful green grass. And this is where I learned one of the most valuable lessons in the cattle industry. I told him, why are you bringing all your cattle into a stable? They all had their individual stables every single night. It's a waste of infrastructure, it's a waste of labor, and the cattle prefer just being out on those pastures. And he said to me, what do you think our main profit driver is in the cattle industry. I said, well, they're beef cows, so I'm assuming it's beef. And he said, no, beef is part of our profit mechanism, but what we really make money out of is when all the luxury hotels and resorts come and scrape the manure off the concrete every morning, and they use that in their vegetable gardens and their flowers. That's where our money comes from. And then another profit driver for us is they buy the bulls to crush coconuts. See that bull in the bottom left there? Walks round and round in circles all day crushing coconuts for coconut milk. On some of the islands, they don't allow motor cars, so they have bulls pulling carts that they have people pulled around with bulls, and then they milk the cows, just for the family consumption. And right at the end of the animal's life, they do harvest them for beef. The lesson I learned there is that you've got to listen before you speak, because every farm, every community, every area, every country, every environment has a different objective. They have different resources and they have different climates, which allow you or force you to change the way in which you raise cattle in these environments. So even though Seychelles, I only had 22 cows to look at, and it took me about an hour, and I had almost 7 days to just sit around on the beach and enjoy it, I took a very valuable lesson from there. Okay, so yeah, you are at the right talk, and what I want to hone in on here is, are there any teachers in the room? Any teachers? There's a teacher. So please don't be offended by what I'm going to say now, because I had very bad teachers, you can tell, growing up. So I'm sure you're not like those teachers. But there's a story that goes around saying that the real heroes are teachers. Teachers are the real heroes. And I'm sure this applies to you. But my teachers weren't really heroes. Like when my teacher was up on the chalkboard writing with chalk, he didn't really cut a very heroic figure. The real heroes are the farmers, okay? And there's several reasons for this. The primary producers, the farmers, the pastoralists, the ranchers. The first thing is the obvious one. Very few of us I'm terribly sorry. So the 2% of us in a lot of countries feed 100% of the population. So that's a superpower, okay? That's something we have to celebrate. That makes us real heroes. The second thing is we decentralize power, okay? So all these little towns across each country that are flourishing, that have shops and hospitals and schools, have little businesses in them. The only reason any of that exists is because of the rural community around it. When you corporatize that rural community, or you nationalize that rural community, and you lose all your primary producers and your small farmers, you lose the power in those towns in terms of wealth and influence and power. And all the power goes to one big city, okay? And when all the power is in one centralized place, the individual people in the country lose that power, and it becomes a tyranny. It's not a democracy anymore. We play a very vital role as farmers, as pastoralists, as primary producers in decentralizing that power. The third part of that is national security. Now, Tanzania's got a lot of people, okay? Countries like Namibia, Botswana, where there's small populations, there's huge areas of those countries where there are very few people, okay? And where it becomes national security is that if there aren't livestock producers, there's no reason for anyone to be there. And when there's no one there, your country could be invaded and you don't even know about it. So the reasons for sending roads and power lines, the reasons for having cell phone signal in those areas is only because the livestock farmers are there. So they become witnesses within that country, and it becomes a national security issue. And then food security, the obvious one, goes back to the first point, is that when very few of us are feeding everyone, that comes into the food security of a country, which is national security. So what we've got to do is we've got to preserve our way of life, okay? Because this agricultural way of life, not because it's precious for us as our culture, but because of the reasons, the superpowers that we bring and the way in which we enrich everyone's lives through it. And the way in which we preserve our way of life, unfortunately, takes a lot of perseverance. No one has to persevere like a primary producer. So the droughts, the floods, the fires, the questionable government decisions, the downturns in markets, we have to persevere through all of that. Yeah. And the way you do that is with productive animals. Productive animals that are fertile, that live a long time, that are adapted to the environment, that are functionally efficient. That's how we preserve our way of life, is by staying on the farm through those animals. Because those animals are profitable, okay? And when a farm or a business is profitable, that whole community becomes prosperous. And that completes that human flourishing value chain. And I think that we need to stop apologizing for being farmers and food producers. When I grew up and when I was farming in South Africa, I had a lot of Jack Russell Terriers, you know, the little dogs. And they were interesting. You could give them a piece of steak and they still look at you as though you're trying to poison them, okay? That's what the population does when we feed them. They look at us and they complain about how we make the feed and where the food comes from and everything. So they're like Jack Russell Terriers. They're not like Labradors. That, you know, the Labrador dogs, they start eating, even they lick the bowl before the food even gets to them. So instead of apologizing for the way in which we make food, we need to celebrate the fact that we are feeding 100% of people with only being 2% of us. And we must keep asking them to thank us for the fact that we're keeping them alive with 3 meals a day. Can we go on to the next slide? Where am I pointing it? No. Can you guys knock it onto the next slide, guys? Maybe I need to stand higher again. No. No? Doesn't want to. Okay. So what other challenges are we facing internationally? Okay, obviously there's climate challenges, there's weather challenges, there's droughts, there's famines. All of these are huge challenges. But all of this creates opportunities. It creates opportunities to adapt into different ways of producing food, introducing different breeds of cattle and different species of animal in order to do that. Sometimes it's small ruminants that do that job, sometimes it's cattle, sometimes it's non-traditional animals that do that job in creating that food. I might need some help here because I have no idea what the next slide is going to be. It's a complete mystery to me. LaRue, what if you sit up there and you become my manager of the slides? Are there any questions while we unjam the slide deck? Any questions? Or LaRue's selling some Dorper sheep later, so if any of you are interested in Dorper sheep, he's the man to talk to about that. Yeah? Yeah. Well, that is at least a nice picture to look at while we talk. So what other challenges do we have? We have law and order challenges in the country that I'm from. Some law and order issues has made it quite dangerous to do business in that country. But what opportunity came from that? Probably the most incredible and dynamic security industry in the world came from that, and has allowed business to continue because of that. Other challenges in India, for example, there's the biggest cattle population in the world, about 320 million cattle. But because of the dominant religion in the country, Hinduism, only 2 states allow cattle slaughter. So now what do you do with all the male calves? So most of them end up on the streets, and they're eating a lot of food that should be eaten by the huge human population of 1.2, 1.3 billion people. What's that? Oh, that's okay. Don't worry. So then, what that leads to is an overpopulation of livestock eating a lot of food that the animals are eating. But fortunately, with Bangladesh being a neighbor that does consume animals, they have created. So they have created a market and an industry into Bangladesh where they send all their male calves, and it's become the biggest export market in the world for cattle. Another challenge is the Middle East, where they have a huge demand for cattle, sheep, and goat sacrificial slaughter during Eid, end of Ramadan, and they don't have the resources to grow all those animals. So that's a challenge. The opportunity is there are countries in Africa and South America and Oceania that supply them with live cattle, sheep, and goats, which has really created good export opportunities in those countries. And I know that earmarking Kenya and Tanzania specifically because of your geographical, how relatively close you are geographically. Okay, so we're back on track now. And now behind me you can see a wheel, and that wheel's got 8 spokes. Okay, so now we're focusing on a livestock business or a livestock farm, and the analogy I'm going to give you, or the metaphor, is that like with a wheel, if those 8 spokes are different lengths, or if there's one missing, the vehicle's going to give you a very uncomfortable ride, and eventually you're going to have a flat tire, and eventually the vehicle breaks down. Okay, and it's the same in our farming operations. There are 8 divisions of a livestock farm that we have to pay attention to. And we might not like doing all 8 of those, but we need to find people who are specialized in those areas to help us. So the first one is genetics, and later at the auction you're going to see an unbelievable opportunity to acquire healthy and flourishing. Marketing, you've just had an unbelievable talk from Martinique Scott on marketing. It's a vital part of the industry. When you've got a product, you need to be able to sell it. And without marketing, it's like winking at someone in a dark room and hoping they saw what you did. Marketing turns the lights on, so you can actually see what products or services there are that go to market. Record keeping. Some people really don't enjoy record keeping. But if you're not keeping record of everything that's happening on your farm, you don't actually know where you are. That's a vitally, vitally important part. Keep as many records as you can. And so a lot of things are measurable, but not everything is meaningful. So try and keep records that are meaningful. Like you can measure all kinds of things, but let's try and keep a record of the meaningful things. And then forage management, making sure you optimize your pastures and your forage resources to a point where you're optimizing the health of your livestock, but also improving the asset you've got in terms of your land that you're working. And lastly is human capital or human resources. None of this works if you don't have a good team around you, and you've got to inspire that team and give it hope. Your team needs to have ownership in what you're doing. Now, you can't run a successful farming operation with only 7 or 6 of those 8 spokes. There have to be all 8 of those spokes operating. Because if only one spoke is missing, like I said, eventually it's an uncomfortable ride, you get a flat tire, the vehicle doesn't move forward. So if there's an area that you don't enjoy doing of those 8, find someone who's good at it to help you with it. Are there any questions at this point? And you can ask difficult questions too. Do you want to help me with LaRue, come on, man. Goodness, you're not just here for a holiday. Okay, so guys, now we're honing on livestock themselves, and this applies to cattle, sheep, goats. It applies to dairy cattle and to beef cattle. Okay, a lot of our attention is maybe paid to the wrong part of the wrong traits in terms of traits that move an industry into a profitable position or move an animal into a profitable position. So adaptability is the most important trait, okay, because it's the gateway trait that allows animals to be fertile and allows animals to have longevity through functional efficiency. Okay, let me break that down. If an animal is not adapted to its environment and the climate and the management practices and not adapted to the nutrition available, it cannot be fertile, it can't live a long time, and it can't be functionally efficient. Okay, so adaptability is key. That's step one. If you avoid step one, there is no step two. Okay, so if you want to increase milk yield or add muscle or do something extra with your cattle, the gateway is adaptability. Okay, so that's what we've tried to do in the sale, is bring adapted cattle to this climate and environment and management practices. So that's what I call a profit trait. These are the traits that keep you in business. Okay, functional efficiency is a profit trait. What does that mean? It means that the animal is functioning efficiently. It's physiology, it's endocrinology, it's got the right amount of muscle and fat, and it's hormonally balanced. Fertility, when measuring an animal that is adapted, that's the number one trait for profitability, because it doesn't matter what else you've got. If you're not reproducing it, it's irrelevant. Okay, and you can breed for fertility. Okay, if measured correctly, that's highly heritable. It means it passes it on to the next generation. Mapping fertility, when you're looking at animals and you want to see whether these animals are phenotypically fertile, there are two traits to look at. The one is their hormones must be balanced. So the females must look like females and the bulls must look like males. Okay? And the second thing is they need to have high inherent body condition, or they must be easy fleshing. Now, why that's important is because fat is energy. Okay? And fat and those calories allow an animal to fall pregnant, allow an animal to give milk if it's a cow, and allow an animal to fight disease. Okay, with surplus calories, animals can be more fertile. The way we breed for fertility is that we identify animals that are early maturing, that have live sperm at a young age, or females that come into estrus at a young age, that put on a layer of fat naturally at a young age. Remember, we've identified fat is key for several reasons. The number one reason fat is key is because it's half of the equation when it comes to fertility. The second thing is that cattle maintain themselves well through the droughts or the winters or the harsher months if they've got fat on them. And the third thing, it's a better eating experience. Meat without fat isn't very nice to eat, is it? Am I right? Even like the Dutch, they like lean meat, but then they put a fat sauce on top of it. So fat is essential to having a good eating experience. Okay. Now there are two ways to get fat. You can breed it in through genetics, or you can feed it in with a bucket. Okay. It's very expensive. The second option of feeding fat in is very, very expensive. So I suggest breeding it in, so you've got genetic fat coming in there. And those easy fleshing cattle, they do a lot of things right, and we'll get into some of those things in a few slides' time. Longevity, cattle that live a long time. Now, you guys are very fortunate because most of your cattle are Bos Indicus or Zebu influenced, and they naturally, the Zebu cattle do live longer because their teeth last longer, their skeletal structures and their feet enable them to last longer. What are some things that make cattle not live long time? Number one is not reproducing, because there's no point in keeping a cow that's not calving every year, right? Number two is bad udders. So when you've got a cows because they've got udders that are too deep or not enough balance in their udders. Number three is bad skeletal structure. If an animal's skeletal structure is not right, if the angles on his or her shoulders not right, or on the hind legs, the angles of the hip and hind quarter aren't right, what does it do? It makes bad feet, okay? Because if there's too much pressure coming onto those feet, they either grow out, looks like they're wearing slippers with a very shallow heel, or they start curling in because there's too much pressure coming down with not enough cushion in the joints or cleanliness in the joints. Longevity is key because also it's very expensive to replace females. If you're keeping back a lot of heifers every year, and there's 2 or 3 years before you actually get offspring out of them, 3 or 4 years before you actually get money for them, that's like owning a hotel and having people stay there without paying for their rooms until the 3rd or the 4th year. It's very expensive, okay? When you have cows that live a long time, then you have to replace fewer heifers every year. So longevity is very, very important. So those are the 4 most important profit-driving traits. That means the traits that keep you in business, the ones that win the war, okay? Adaptability, functional efficiency, fertility, longevity. What are the traits that the marketing people try and sell you on? Not Martinique, she's not like that. Andrew Miller, he's not like that. They won't do this, you know. They won't come and try and sell shiny disco balls of milk and muscle and marbling and growth and weight. Those are called turnover traits. That's what you get paid for on the day. That makes the headlines in the newspaper, okay? That's not what keeps you in business, though. Those are very important. It's important to have those, but you need to optimize the turnover traits. What do you do with the top line traits? The profit traits, you maximize. Make them as adapted as possible, as fertile as possible, have them live as long as possible, have them as functionally efficient as possible. The bottom line, do you want as much milk as possible? No. Too much milk is a disaster, even in a dairy farm, okay, because it's antagonistic to fertility. Do you want them as big as possible? No, you saw the show yesterday, not the biggest bull one, not the biggest heifer, the most optimized animal. Do you want the most muscle? No, because muscle is antagonistic to fertility. So we want to find that happy medium. We need average cattle. We need the best average cattle that you can find. Because big isn't best, small isn't best, thick isn't best, narrow isn't best. Best is best, and the best cattle are those that are maximized on the top line and optimized on the bottom line. Are you guys still with me, or do you think I'm losing the plot here? Okay. Can we go to the next slide? Thank you, LaRue. Okay, here's examples of adaptability. So you'll see the white cows the breed called Nelore. They're from Brazil. There's 180 million Nelore influenced cattle in Brazil. Okay. Perfectly adapted to that environment. It's hot, it's humid, there's predators, there's insects, there's all kinds of diseases. Those cattle are at home there. The other cow, have you seen these cattle before? It's called a Scottish Highland. They're from Scotland, okay? Perfectly adapted in Scotland. It's wet, it's cold, it's windy, very average to bad terrain up in the hills. They graze on scrub and almost nothing in the winter. Perfectly adapted. What happens if you take a Nelore and put it in Scotland? She gets so cold, she uses all her energy to stay warm. She's miserable. She will eat 4 times more than a Highland cow to be productive. Okay, so that starts getting expensive. Okay. What happens if you take a Highland cow and put it in Brazil? It'll live maybe 20 to 30 days and then that's the end. They just won't survive. So adaptability is key. Okay, what's our next slide there? So guys, this applies to sheep, goats, and cattle too. Okay, so all these examples apply across all the ruminant livestock we're going to discuss. This is interesting. You know that 70% of the world's cattle are in the tropics. Okay? So we're in the tropics today. You can feel it. And if you don't believe me, go outside for a few minutes and you'll feel it. Okay? This is incredibly important that we identify what it means for an animal to be tropically adapted. So when you think that only 30% of the world's cattle are in the temperate zones, But a lot of attention from the North American and European genetic companies are focused on Holstein and Angus and all the breeds that are prominent in those zones. There's a big opportunity for us to work on cattle that work in the tropics, because that is the next frontier. What does it mean to be tropically adapted? Can we get the next slide there? Okay. So, tropically adapted, you see this bull on the beach. What it means is several different things. And we discussed this yesterday, so again, I'm sorry for being repetitive and maybe redundant. But these cattle have a certain body type. Like if you take an antelope, the dominant antelope in Tanzania, and compare them to a moose in the Arctic or the temperate zones, it's a totally different body type. They're smaller, they've got more fine bones, it's a smaller surface area of the body. So when we're selecting our cattle, sheep and goats, we must be mindful of that. It's not going to be the same as a Charolais bull in France. Okay, those cattle aren't going to do as well here as our adapted animals. The second thing is skin. We've got to keep a lot of skin on these cattle, because the more hide you've got, the more sweat glands you've got. And cattle sweat, and that's how they dissipate heat. So heat tolerance comes from dissipating heat, and that happens through sweat glands. Okay, and the Bos Indicus or Zebu cattle have got more sweat glands per square inch than the Bos Taurus cattle. Okay. The next thing is Bos Indicus cattle secrete a lot more sebum than the Bos Taurus cattle do. That's, you know, when you're working with Zebu cattle or Boran cattle, Bos Indicus cattle, you can smell it. It's a different smell. They secrete sebum, and it's a insect repellent, and it's sunscreen. Something I should have worn yesterday, which I forgot to wear. Now I'm paying the price because I don't have sebum, you know, to keep me sheltered from the sun. This is a very strong trait that tropically adapted cattle need. They also have a subcutaneous muscle. So what that is a muscle under the skin. So if a tick or a fly lands on that muscle, they can shake it off wherever the the insect lands on their skin. The European and British cattle can't do that. They have to use their tongue or their tails. They use a lot of energy getting rid of flies and ticks, where the cattle, the Bos Indicus, Zebu cattle, can shake those off. Color is also very important. So at high altitude, in temperate areas and high altitude, darker colors, black cattle or cattle with dark pigment around their eyes and around their extremities, these cattle can utilize the ultraviolet rays very, very well. In savanna or veld, that's lower altitude and more hot and where the infrared is very strong, that's when you need lighter colored cattle. So your gray cattle or your creamy honey colored cattle, your silver colored cattle, the lighter red cattle, and then some darker red cattle too, they reflect light. Remember, black absorbs light. Are you signaling me? Oh, not me. Okay. Oh, sorry. 10 minutes. Wonderful. Okay. So, yeah, I've got so many bosses. Sorry, man. I'm a mammalian species. Bulls and females don't look the same. If three men are sitting together on a couch, what's touching? Your shoulders. If three ladies are sitting together on a couch, what's touching? Your hips. Okay? It must be the same with cattle. So what you see in those two Angus cattle at the top, those black Angus cattle, the bull looks a little bit feminine, right? It doesn't look like a bull. And the female looks a little bit masculine. She doesn't look like a female. But they're the same genetics. So you know how that happens. They're not breeding for reproduction. They're breeding for growth and for carcass. Okay? And when you do that, you're propagating growth hormones. And when you propagate growth hormones, you get longer long bones, bigger long bones. You get a taller animal that might put more muscle on from an absolute standpoint. But you delay the sex hormones from kicking in. So sex hormones only start when the growth hormones stop, when the long bones stop growing. They ossify. Okay. So to create sexual dimorphism, which is when the bulls look like bulls and the females like females, and avoid sexual monomorphism, is when the bulls and females look the same, you select for reproduction primarily. So animals that reproduce themselves. When you do that, everything else falls into place, okay? The bulls have muscle, the females have fat, the udders are good, the testicles are good, the sheaths are good. Those cattle become practical in their size and in their form. So, to simplify this, your primary objective when breeding, dairy cows, beef cows, sheep, goats, needs to be reproduction, fertility, and then everything else falls into place. If your primary objective is more milk, more muscle, more marbling, more weight, more growth, you're going to get that sexual monomorphism, where the bulls they're like metrosexual. They're not alpha males, okay? We need to avoid that. And the females become a little strong and powerful. Let's go on to the next slide there. Next. Okay, let's go one back. One slide, there we go. Guys, I'm going to close on this slide. And this is going to be just to get our minds right in terms of what the appropriate size a cow should be, okay? So I get asked this question everywhere. They say, what's a good size for a cow? What size are your cows? What do your guys' cows weigh, more or less? Okay. There's a prize for the person who answers. Yeah, what? 350. Okay. So your prize is you get to sit in the front row at the auction. Okay. So the answer to this is not complicated, but it's complex, and I'm going to try and simplify it. Okay. To get to the right size cow, okay, number one is these cattle need to be pregnant by a certain age. Now, in some places that's going to be 2 years old, and in some places it's going to be 3 years old, or somewhere in between there. Okay. But you've got to set that objective and you've got to stick to it. So any animals that can't do that within your objective, they need to be moved out of the herd. The second thing is, these animals need to be bred within a breeding season. Okay, so you identify that breeding season, whether it's 90 days or 65 days or 45 days, it needs to be established, and you've got to make sure that all those animals breed within that. It forces your animals to be fertile. It's so good for management practices, for marketing. You're selling a contemporary group that's all the same age. You establish a minimum weaning weight when you're selling these cattle. Okay, so you'll have in your mind at 7 or 8 months, 6 to 8 months, what your calves need to weigh. And this is different in every environment around every country. Okay? But you have that in your head. So any calves at that age that are lighter than that, that means that the animal needs to be moved out of your system. You know what that does? It stops your cows from getting too big. Because for getting too small. Because an animal that's too small won't give you that right weaning weight. Then you've got to establish an efficiency, a cow-calf efficiency, that's at least 45% at 6 to 8 months. That means that if the cow is 350, then you're going to need to be 125 to 150 kilos, okay, if you manage it correctly. You probably don't want to get too much more than 55%, because then there's too much energy going into feeding the calf and not enough into reproduction and fighting disease. So 45 to 55 is the sweet spot of cow-calf efficiency. That's the percentage weight of the calf compared to the cow at 6 to 8 months. Nutrition. You've got to feed them what the responsible, professional, commercial